Picture a wolf circling the edge of a human camp 30,000 years ago, not to attack, but to eat what the humans threw away. That wolf isn't there because it's brave. It's there because it's found a shortcut evolution didn't plan for. And that shortcut is about to accidentally create an entirely new species. Let's go. Here's the story you've probably absorbed without ever questioning it. Early humans found wolf pups, maybe after killing the mother, maybe after finding an abandoned litter. They raised the pups by hand. The pups grew up loyal, useful for hunting and guarding, and over generations humans selectively bred the friendliest ones until wolves became dogs. It's a nice story. It's got a clear hero, a clear decision, a clear moment where humans looked at a wild animal and chose to make it a companion. It's also almost certainly not what happened. Not even close. The real explanation doesn't involve a single human making a single choice about domestication at all. It involves garbage. Specifically, it involves whichever wolves were bold enough, or maybe just relaxed enough, to approach a pile of human food scraps without panicking and running. Think about what an early human camp actually looked like from a wolf's perspective. Concentrated, reliable calories, bones, scraps, spoiled meat, whatever a group of hunter-gatherers didn't finish. For a wolf, that's an enormous nutritional shortcut compared to chasing down an elk across open terrain and risking a broken leg doing it. But there's a catch. Getting close enough to that food source meant getting close to humans. And humans were, by this point in history, already the most effective predator on the planet. Most wolves wouldn't risk it. The fear response was simply too strong, but some wolves had slightly lower fear thresholds than others. Not friendlier exactly, just less reactive, less likely to flee at the first sign of a human silhouette or a human voice. Those wolves got to eat the garbage. The wolves with higher fear thresholds stayed away, burned more energy chasing wild prey, and on average had a slightly harder time surviving and reproducing. Generation after generation, camp after camp, the wolves willing to tolerate proximity to humans ate more reliably, and their calmer temperament got passed down. Nobody bred them on purpose. Nobody selected them. The garbage pile did the selecting. Humans were, from the wolf's point of view, essentially an accidental farm animal that happened to produce food waste instead of crops. This idea has an actual name in evolutionary biology. It's called self-domestication, and the evidence for it comes from one of the most famous experiments in the history of genetics. But before we get to the experiment, it's worth sitting with how strange this actually is as a mechanism. Nobody had to be smart about it. Nobody had to plan a single generation ahead. The wolves themselves had no idea they were participating in anything. All that was required was a repeatable pressure applied consistently over thousands of years. And evolution did the rest without anyone directing it. That's the part people tend to skip past when they tell the cute version of this story, the idea that intelligence or intention was involved anywhere in the early stages. There wasn't any. There was just fear, food, and time. In the late 1950s, a Soviet scientist named Dmitry Belyaev started an experiment with silver foxes on a farm in Siberia. He wasn't trying to make foxes friendlier for its own sake. He was trying to test exactly this hypothesis, that selecting purely for low fear and low aggression toward humans, nothing else, no selection for appearance or behavior beyond tameness, would eventually produce something that looked and acted a lot like a domestic dog. Every generation, researchers picked the calmest, least fearful foxes and bred them together. Within just a few fox generations, something remarkable started happening. The foxes didn't just get friendlier, their ears started flopping. Their tails started curling upward. Some developed patches of white fur. Their skulls changed shape slightly. Their stress hormone levels dropped. Behaviors and physical traits nobody was selecting for showed up as a side effect of selecting purely for calmness around humans. This matters enormously for the wolf story because it shows that domestication-style traits, floppy ears, curled tails, patchy coloring, playful behavior into adulthood, can emerge automatically as a byproduct of one single pressure, reduced fear response. Nobody has to select for cuteness. Cuteness apparently comes bundled with tameness. Whether you're breeding foxes in a Siberian lab or wolves are self-selecting around a garbage pile, the archaeological and genetic evidence lines up with this timeline in a way that's genuinely hard to argue with. Genetic studies place the wolf to dog split somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, well before agriculture, well before humans had any concept of selective breeding as a deliberate practice. That timing matters. Deliberate breeding programs require a settled population with the concept of ownership and generational planning. Hunter-gatherers moving camp every few weeks were not running structured breeding programs. What they had was garbage, proximity, and time. That's all self-domestication actually needs. And the fox experiment is still running today, decades after Belyaev's death, with descendants of those original foxes now dozens of generations deep into the same selection process. The foxes in the tame line will approach researchers, wag their tails, whine for attention, and actively seek out human contact the same way a dog does at a shelter. The foxes in a separate control line, bred without any selection for tameness, remain as wary and reactive as any wild fox you'd encounter in the forest. Same species, same starting genetics decades ago. One variable changed: tolerance of humans, and an entire suite of physical and behavioral traits came along for the ride. That's not a coincidence. That's a mechanism. There's also a detail in the fossil record that quietly supports this. The skull's shape of early proto-dogs found at sites in Siberia and Belgium dating back over 30,000 years shows measurable differences from wolves of the same era, before there's any archaeological evidence of humans intentionally controlling breeding. The physical divergence starts before the deliberate partnership does. The dog was already becoming a dog before humans noticed or cared. So somewhere in this process, the relationship flips. Once a population of unusually calm, human-tolerant wolves is hanging around camps consistently, humans start noticing something useful. These animals bark at approaching predators or strangers. They can help track wounded prey. They're around anyway. So why not let them stay close? Maybe even encourage it a little by tossing them extra scraps directly instead of letting them scavenge. This is the point where something that looks like intentional partnership actually begins. But it begins after the biological transformation is already well underway, not before. Humans didn't domesticate the wolf. The wolf domesticated itself, and humans showed up later to formalize a relationship that natural selection had already been quietly building for thousands of years. This same pattern, it turns out, isn't unique to wolves and foxes either. Researchers studying bonobos, one of our two closest living primate relatives alongside chimpanzees, have proposed that bonobos underwent a similar self-domestication process compared to their more aggressive chimpanzee cousins. Bonobos show reduced aggression, more juvenile facial features retained into adulthood, and social structures built around cooperation rather than dominance hierarchies enforced through violence. Nobody was selectively breeding bonobos in a lab. The pressure came from their own social environment, where calmer, more cooperative individuals seem to have had a reproductive advantage over more aggressive ones. The same basic recipe shows up again in a completely different branch of the animal kingdom, entirely independent of wolves, entirely independent of any human involvement at all. Whatever this mechanism is, it doesn't appear to care what species it's acting on. Here's where it gets a little uncomfortable if you think about it for more than a few seconds. This same self-domestication pressure may not be unique to wolves. Some researchers studying our own species have proposed that something similar happened to humans. Compared to other primates and to earlier hominin species, modern humans show physically softer features, reduced aggression thresholds, and skeletal changes that echo the same domestication syndrome seen in Belyaev's foxes. The theory suggests that early human groups may have selected against overly aggressive individuals within their own communities, socially or otherwise, in ways that produced a calmer, more cooperative species over tens of thousands of years. If that's true, the dog isn't just a species we happen to shape by accident. It might be a mirror of something that happened to us too, just slower and through different mechanisms. There's a strange symmetry worth pointing out here, too. The traits that show up as byproducts of self-domestication in foxes, floppy ears, patchy coloring, a face that stays juvenile-looking well into adulthood, are almost exactly the traits humans find instinctively endearing. We didn't design dogs to look cute to us. Cuteness wasn't the goal of any breeding program, accidental or otherwise. It appears to be an automatic side effect of reduced fear and aggression, the same biological package that comes bundled with calmness whenever this kind of selection happens. Which means the reason you find a dog's face appealing isn't really about dogs at all. It's about a much older, much stranger biological rule that links tameness to a specific set of physical features, a rule that was operating millions of years before any human ever looked at an animal and thought it looked cute. What this really means is that domestication was never a single deliberate invention. It was closer to a slow accident, running quietly in the background of history, driven by nothing more sophisticated than which animals could tolerate standing near a fire without running: the dog. Sleeping at your feet right now exists because some wolf, tens of thousands of years ago, was just a little less afraid than the rest of its pack and decided the garbage was worth the risk. Nobody planned that. Nobody could have. It just happened, one slightly calmer wolf at a time, generation after generation, until an entire species quietly became something else without a single one of them ever knowing it.